believe that there, right now, in the 20th district, there are thousands, I believe this, thousands of people right now in our district that can represent us well. That can go to Washington, D.C. and do a great job representing us. So, and I will tell you that there are some people say, no, no, you need that same person because that person's got experience and that person can spend 10, 20, 30, 40 years there. I think that, you know, there's one that's down there that was a war hero. He was a good guy and, you know, and meant well, and he's been there for many, many years now, and he's under a cloud of, he's going to have to face trial, you know, and in my view, and by the way, that happened on both sides of the political aisle. You could name one name, I could name another, you do this back and forth. It's both parties. But part of the problem is we need political reform. And I think that we the people, we can have more control over our government if we just recognize the fact that we don't need the same person there forever. We could do 2 terms, and we could attenuate, not extinguish. We could attenuate the effect of money without having stepping on free speech, because you won't have members then that, you know, that got these war chests. What do you want? And then, of course, then it comes time for votes, and they're like, hey, who helped you out?
How do you set that idea in motion from the citizen standpoint and from the legislative standpoint?
Well, yes, ma'am. Here's what I've done. I've said that on TV. I went down and I said that on TV.
Yeah, but that doesn't get it done.
Well, that starts, because if I get elected, I'm going to be the guy that does this. I'm going to be the thorn in the side that says, we support political reform. Political reform, you know, and let's get going on the term limits. So, at the worst case, I've term limited myself. So I'm going to try sincerely and hard. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, is term limits better than having a third party floating around?
Well, here's the thing on the third party. Is, first of all, we actually have third parties. We do. We've got, you know, Libertarian, we've got the Green Party, we've got third parties. And I don't think that we can legislate. That's the challenge. I mean, you just can't, so it's a matter of attraction. Now, you know, the Republican Party started as a third party. It was the party that really connected with the issue of slavery and then looked at other issues. And then what happened is you had these 2 dominant parties, the Whig Party and the Democratic Party, which, to confuse you further, the Democratic Party was actually the Republican Party, if you go back far enough. That's where you can trace this all back. But
liberals used to be conservative.
Well, that's true, actually, because liberals were tied to liberty. That's a long conversation. We can have it sometime. It's very interesting. It really is very interesting. But the thing of it is that so if there's a powerful idea that comes to the fore, if there's a powerful idea. Sorry, sir.
Yeah. How are we going to stop the administration from borrowing billions of dollars from China?
We got to balance our budget. We got to balance our budget. See, this is why, you know, I come forward. You can disagree with my points of view.
But it's not the administration; it's the Congress that's passing it.
Right. No, you're absolutely. You know what it is? It's shared. It's actually our founders set it up. They basically set up a system with no one in charge, and they liked it that way. I mean, they basically made separate institutions sharing power. You have a Congress that has 2 houses. They're supposed to raise the revenue bills, right? And then it passes both houses. It goes to the president. He can veto. He or she can veto, and then it can come back for override. So it absolutely is. And I will tell you that, you know, the founders actually put the Congress first. I mean, they gave them pride and place. Article 1 is actually the Congress. Article 2 is the executive. You know, and they set it up that way because, you know, obviously we're all products of our experience. The founders were no different. The founders were dealing with the most immediate experience of King George. But the founders had not forgotten about Cromwell. They hadn't forgotten about Cromwell. But the point being that I think the way we have to address this is we got to recognize, I think the first step is to grow the private sector economy. Here's why. If you try to balance the budget, right now at 10% unemployment, it's just, you can't get, because you're paying unemployment insurance and you're not gaining revenues. That's why I've said we got to grow the private sector economy, and that's the first step towards balancing the budget. Then I think we need to make hard choices. And this is where I'm subject to criticism. This is why they got the ads up right now. Because, you know, if I were like some folks who are running right now, they stop. That's all they say, right? And then they say, well, you know, and then of course they're subject to saying, how are you going to do that? That doesn't add up. And I felt ethically, and I also believed it in my soul, that what I share with you, I believe we're going to do this. We're going to make this happen. I mean, you know, we're going to work hard to win here, but I'll tell you, I believe this. If we're going to restore our country, we're going to have to do what it is that I suggest, but what we need to do then is make hard choices about the expenditures of our money. And I believe that we're overstructured. We've grown our federal government so big that we don't even realize this. It didn't start out this way. That's the whole issue of liberal, by the way. Why that came into play is because when FDR started calling himself liberal, Hoover actually threw the flag on the field. He said, that's not liberal. We're liberal. And why I said it was interesting is by 1939, Hoover gives a speech. And he says, forget it. You have so bastardized that word, I don't want it anymore. And he basically yields the field on that term. But that's the history of it. It's actually interesting if you want to follow the speeches on that. But I'm going to get you 1 second, so I'll be right with you. So anyways, that's why I'm an advocate, though, for consolidating the federal government. Because I think it's too big. We can't afford it. And if we try to tax our way out of it, we'll never get there. You know, this is probably the appropriate place to tell you that my read of history, 1929 to 1932. Look, 1920s, we did too much extension on credit. We were overextended. We had a crash. We had a correction. We had a crash in our market, October 29. And what happened immediately afterwards is, you know, the Fed, which is actually maligned. If you look at history, the Federal Reserve gets maligned for not being flexible. And I think that's probably fair. But the Fed actually got it right in the first few months. The Fed met in February of 1930 and said, look, they said, we're going to lower the interest rate. They lowered it 2 points, and we're going to increase the money supply, and then you need to let this thing correct on its own. That's what the Fed said. And the Fed did it, and then the stock market from February of 1930 to April 1930 actually went up. It went up. But what happened is we took counsel of our fears. We passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, the Smoot-Hawley tariff, that doubled the tax on imports for 25,000 commodities. And what happened is that there was a trade war. Countries all around the world reciprocated. Our farmers, and then we had a big drought that summer, so our farmers then, when they tried to go sell their goods, they couldn't get a competitive price. They had a series, farms went under. When farms went under in the summer of 1930, they were very inextricably tied to banks, community banks. Banks went under. Now you had a situation where Hoover decides he's going to start stepping up the public works to try to help. By the way, if you go down to the mall in Washington, D.C. and you look at the cornerstones, it's not going to tell you 1933, 34, 35. Take a look at the cornerstones. It's 1930. It's Hoover that starts a lot of these buildings on the mall. But anyways, now what happens is, that's your first tax hike, is the Smoot-Hawley tariff. And then what happens is the administration starts running a huge deficit. And in the early part of 31, people start to panic. And they say, huge deficit, well, we better then raise taxes. That's what they said. So what happens is this is all going through the Congress. The Congress then debates all this. And let me tell you, when the Smoot-Hawley tariff bill was signed, when it was passed and signed, the stock market dropped 20%. It dropped 20% because the business community reacted poorly to it. They said, we see what's coming. Not a good idea. They saw what was coming. So now we started heading south. We started spending the public works. The Congress and the President agree on this big tax increase. It's called the Revenue Act of 1932. At the time, that was the largest peacetime tax increase in our country's history. It even reached back to World War I and reinstituted some of the war tax. And then you'd say, well, if we increased all those taxes, we clearly must have raised revenues. And of course, you'd be wrong. Revenues went from $2.1 billion in 1931 to $1.9 billion. Revenues went down because the economy was heading south because capital was drying up. And see, this is why I don't believe in raising taxes right now. And my opponent's saying I don't want to raise taxes for those making $250,000. I'm not for raising anybody's taxes right now because I've read that history, and that's what concerns me. I want us to learn from that history. You know, now once we grow the economy and begin to move towards a balanced budget, I've said all along, in a couple of years, I'm willing to do comprehensive tax reform, but not now. Because part of the reason why we're having uncertainty right now is because we did this huge healthcare bill that people know is going to be hard, but they don't know how bad it's going to be. That's what's conducive. That's what led, in my view, that's what's led to the uncertainty. Is you have people that are looking out there seeing a hostile and uncertain environment, and then they see the uncertainty, and that has, as Paul Krugman has said, you've got lots of capital now that is sitting on the sideline, not going into our economy because business owners don't know how to read this. They don't know what to do with it. They're concerned about their situation. So I wanted to share that with you in relation to your comment. That's why I stand on we should not raise taxes right now because we're trying to get the private sector economy going. Because when we get the private sector economy going, that's going to be related to the deficit and the debt, and that's going to be related to so many things in our life, in our society. Yes, sir?
Yeah.